There we go. Sorry that we had to cancel last week. We had to carry over some topics. The first one from Oguzan and Tom about
Yes.
lifecycle processing. Hey, Tom.
Hey, yeah. So we noticed that when our lifecycle processing was kicking in at midnight UTC, that essentially it would make multi-site replication look like it had paused entirely. And from digging around in the source code, just to check that my understanding is correct on this, the deletes from lifecycle are added to the replication, like the data log and the bucket index log for replicating over. And then because that's now all in the log and lifecycle processing is way faster than client traffic generally, you end up with a huge pile of stuff at the same timestamp. So it looks like it's paused from like data sync stats and stuff like that. Is that correct?
I see, yeah. That is the behavior I would expect.
Yeah. So I think that the other part of this was that even when we changed the work time to not start at midnight UTC, we noticed that the spike was still the same time. And just check that I've understood correctly again here. Is it this because objects are supposed to expire at midnight UTC if there's no like specific time set?
Midnight, and I think it's actually machine time instead of UTC. So if your machine has a time zone, it'll be whatever time zone that is.
Okay.
But that's when lifecycle starts, right? All lifecycle rules apply starting because the lifecycle rules are daily.
Yeah.
And so daily it applies starting at midnight, and so that's when any object expiry rule will apply at midnight.
Okay.
And obviously, depending on how long it takes to actually process your life cycle, it may not happen at midnight, but that's the cutoff time at which it will apply.
Yeah. So because this means that like client puts and stuff can end up being caught up in a bunch of deletions which have already happened due to lifecycle running on the replica already. I was wondering just if there's any way forward to avoid having all of the lifecycle deletes appear in the log, or space them out a bit so that it's not like completely paused. Any ideas or suggestions on that?
Right. So lifecycle currently doesn't really do any throttling, right? It's just a thread pool that's working as fast as it can.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, and I don't see that behavior as being particularly different in multi-site versus none, except for all of the extra logging. So, I mean, in the past, when we've discussed lifecycles delete workload, it's been about that interrupting client performance, and so we've been planning to take advantage of Rados's QoS for a long time, but progress on the librados integration part has been slow. I'm hoping that it sounds like the Rados team is prioritizing this for the S release, so it might be a good time to work with them and see if we can fit something in for RGW background work like lifecycle and garbage collection. But I don't think that really, I'm not sure that really covers the issues with multi-site in particular.
Why do you need radars to throttle your work? I mean, this could just be some kind of parameter.
Right, that's not the only way to do throttling, but I mean, I think it's tricky to define a manageable rate to throttle at.
I think I ran into similar problems in the past when it came to billing cycles, which behaves kind of similar. And we never defined a rate. What we defined is the maximum time that we allowed for the cleanup or for the background process to take. And this really depends with what your cycle is, right? So if your cycle is daily, define that the whole thing can take 2 hours.
I
You
mean,
don't
that
care,
already
right?
exists. The RGW lifecycle work time defines the window in which you're allowed to run. And by default, it's midnight to 6. So 6 hours.
No, I'm not talking the time of the day. Let's say that you have a daily cycle, then as long as you finish your whole work in 24 hours, well, you're good, right? So the only thing that you need is to finish your work before the next cycle. Now, you don't have to go to that extreme. You can decide, okay, it's a daily cycle, so we have to finish everything within, I don't know, 3 hours. Okay, so pace yourself in 3 hours compared to the amount of work that you have to do. If you have a cycle of an hour, then, well, you have to stress up the system, right? So you have to say all the work has to be done in 10 minutes. And this is what your the time that the slot of time that you give for the background work.
So the issue is determining the amount of work you have to do is a significant amount of work. And right now we're only doing that once as we do the work, right? We don't know ahead of time how much work we have. We just start doing it and we go bucket by bucket and we do work, right? And if we have to scan the entire cluster ahead of time to figure out how much work we have to do and how long it's going to take, that's going to take a significant amount of time. And right now, the problem most people have is that their life cycle can't finish, not that it's going too fast. The most complaints we've had about life cycle is that there's not enough time for it to finish. It needs to go faster, not slower.
So it doesn't finish within the time.
It doesn't finish within 24 hours.
Okay, for the next cycle.
Right. So for really big clusters, we cannot do all the work in 24 hours, depending on how much work there is, right? Some days, yes, some days, no. But there are times when it cannot finish within 24 hours. And we have had problems where the next life cycle starts up and the previous life cycle is already running, and we've had to add code specifically to handle that. So, I mean, we could do that, right? But I think that you literally have to scan the entire cluster in order to find out just how much work there is to do. And the majority of your lifecycle work can be done while you're doing the scan. So you've literally doubled the amount of work you have to do just in order to find out how much work you have to do.
Yeah, the way I see it, I think that lifecycle should work as fast as it can and use as many cluster resources as it needs, as long as it doesn't interfere with other work going on. And that's why I think that Rados level QoS is a good fit here.
I would tend to agree. I think QoS is a better solution than any sort of separate throttling in lifecycle. That said, we may have a special case here because we don't have QoS for the log, right? And the log is the thing here that is interfering with the normal work. So we may have to do something special about that.
But you're doing the deletion, and the deletion for sure it goes through the regular Rados process. So if you paste the deletions, then the log would paste themselves, right?
I mean, that depends on how the QoS is working, right? If the QoS is, I don't know how the QoS is working. If it's specifically doing the QoS operations on the log, then yes. But the log rates are a separate operation than the actual deletes or creates, right? And if you're
Right.
if you're
But-
doing QoS on the deletes and creates and not on the log, then you can still back stuff up behind the log.
Right, but I still think QoS on the deletes themselves would help to pace.
I mean, it may be sufficient. It absolutely may. I did have a question though. Do we need to log deletes for lifecycle? Because lifecycle is running on all the machines, on all the zones. And so it'll get run on the other zone as well and be locally deleted. So
Yeah.
can we just
Just,
not log deletes for lifecycle?
multi-site is tricky. We've thought about this a lot over the years and kind of gone back and forth. Initially, there were bugs that prevented secondary zones from doing lifecycle processing anyway, so it was all happening on the primary and replicating. But that was fixed, and so now it runs everywhere. The reason that I feel like we need to keep it that way is because we support per bucket replication, which adds some granularity, meaning that each zone doesn't necessarily have the same set of data. So if you only run lifecycle on one zone, then it might miss objects on other zones that should be transitioned or expired. It might be that we can teach lifecycle processing enough about the replication policies to know whether something needs to be applied on another zone or not. Or no, I guess as long as lifecycle processes everywhere, we can rely on that to make the changes instead of replicating anything. So
Yeah,
it could work
that was
to
my
not
thought.
log anything.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. So you could, because if I understand right, lifecycle operates per bucket. We could check if the bucket is replicated, and if so, then we can know that we can just ignore lifecycle deletes because it's happening everywhere.
Well, so I think what we would just do is we would say this is a lifecycle operation, don't log it at all.
Right.
And
Instead of
then
relying on sync to replicate lifecycle changes, we would rely on lifecycle running on all zones and
Right.
making the changes itself.
Cool, makes sense.
So with like put and delete operations, there's a bool log op flag that comes in at some level. Generally, we check whether multi-site is enabled for that flag, but lifecycle specifically could set it to false just to prevent logging anything for those ops.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like it would solve the problem. Yep, thanks. I think that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah, great. And I'm still keen to take advantage of Rados level QoS for this and other stuff, but could definitely be separated. So how do you guys want to track this? Should I open a tracker issue? Is this something that, Tom, you can take on?
Yeah, I think we could probably take on that. A tracker wouldn't go amiss.
Okay, I created one and I'll paste it in the agenda here. It's not assigned and doesn't have a description, but oops, I assigned it to the wrong Thomas. But I will add more details offline.
Thank you very much.
All right, any other thoughts on lifecycle and multi-site? Shilpa, can you think of any corner cases with archive zone specifically, which runs its own lifecycle processing that wouldn't need to do any replication logging there, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't need any replication logging there. So I can't think of any problems with archive zone with this change.
Excellent. All right, thank you guys for raising that one. Let's move on to Kernal, a question about Ceph logging.
Yep, yeah, it's kind of trivial, just kind of confirmation about. So this was one of the review comments that I was having discussion with you all. The way I was seeing is we usually use -1 for any errors. It seems like if you're trying to log any errors with -1, we cannot suppress that debug log if we have to. So do we have to use -1 or we don't use -1? That's basically the question. Yeah.
I mean, there are examples of -1 or LD air, which is a macro that uses -1. I would say that if those are like fatal errors that we know that the admin needs to see, then it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like errors during request handling in particular, when we're already returning an error code to the client,
Sure.
that's usually not something that the admin needs to see in the logs.
Okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, so -1 is more for the admin actually, like to kind of grab the attention more than for anybody else. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's kind of just a problem with what the client sent in a request, then that's likely to just fill up logs that aren't all that useful to the admin.
Makes sense. Sure. Okay. Yep. That solves my problem. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, there's no really hard set policy for logging error or log levels, but thanks Yuval for raising that.
Sure. On my deep to-do list, I have this logging levels in RGW. Anyways.
All right then. Any other topics for the agenda? I know that Adam Emerson has still been thinking about data log stuff, but he is off today, so hopefully we can revisit that next week. If there's nothing else, we can call it here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.